We were told to take off our clothes. That's the sentence everyone remembers, the one that echoes in the mind like a grim prophecy delivered on a calm, unsuspecting morning in Manila, a moment frozen in time under a sky heavy with uncertainty. It came out flat, almost bored, stripped of emotion, as if the words themselves were tired of their own weight, worn down by the repetition of war's harsh demands. Like a harbor crane creaking and groaning without intention, its rusted joints protesting with every slow movement, the order sliced through the humid air, cutting through the stillness with a chilling precision. In the background, Manila's waves kept their ceaseless rhythm, lapping against the shore with a relentless, indifferent cadence, a natural heartbeat that mocked the human drama unfolding nearby. Ropes slapped against wooden posts, their sharp cracks punctuating the stillness like gunshots in the distance, each sound a jolt to the already frayed nerves. Somewhere nearby, a British truck coughed once, a hoarse, mechanical sputter, a brief gasp of life, before falling silent as if it, too, held its breath in solidarity with the stunned crowd. Now the 300 women, nurses with calloused hands hardened by long hours of tending wounds, clerks with ink-stained fingers bent over endless paperwork, and fleeing the chaos of war with haunted eyes, stood frozen, their breaths caught in their throats, suspended in a moment of disbelief, just long enough to process the impossible command, take off your clothes. Lies don't prepare you for the harsh clarity of daylight, the unforgiving light that strips away illusions and forces reality into focus. Propaganda had painted vivid pictures of shame, revenge, and a small, humiliating death that would precede the final one, its colors bold and its promises dark, etched into the psyche with every broadcast. It whispered of cruelty cloaked in victory, of enemies who relished suffering with a cold, calculated glee, their faces twisted in triumph. A woman near the front, her voice barely above a breath, a fragile thread of sound in the oppressive silence, murmured, "So this is how we die." Her words hung in the air, fragile and heavy, a delicate balloon filled with dread as the guards stood motionless, statues carved from discipline and detachment. They didn't brag or gloat. They didn't leer with malice or revel in their power. They simply waited, their boots shifting restlessly on the coral gravel, the sound like a faint heartbeat beneath the tension, a rhythmic pulse that underscored the gravity of the moment. Then a second voice broke through, young and deliberate, measured with care, its tone steady like a surgeon's scalpel. It spoke of a check for bugs and sickness, a medical step, nothing more, a clinical necessity in the face of war's filth. No harm will come to you, it promised, a statement delivered with the precision of a regulation, cold and detached. It felt wrong, misplaced, an anomaly in a world so steeped in cruelty because no one had earned this mercy, no one had paid the price for such an unexpected reprieve. Akko moved first. Once a nurse, her hands still carried the steady rhythm of routine, a muscle memory forged in the chaos of field hospitals, even as the world crumbled around her into ash and ruin. Her fingers, which had wrapped bandages in the dim glow of field hospitals lit by flickering oil lamps, found the buttons of her uniform by muscle memory, guided by an instinct honed through years of service. One by one, the buttons came undone, her clothes opening like whispered secrets laid bare, each movement a confession to the air around her. Shame burned hotter than fear, a fire that consumed her from within, licking at her soul with relentless intensity. Then, the story shifted in a way no one could have foreseen, a quiet rupture in the narrative of despair, a crack in the armor of hopelessness that had encased them all. White shapes emerged from behind the line of guards, not ropes, not coarse sacks rough against the skin, but towels, soft and unexpected, a beacon of gentleness in the grim landscape. A British officer, his face averted as if shielding his own decency from the raw vulnerability before him, handed one to a KO. His gesture was like a man avoiding his sister's gaze when she's wounded, a quiet respect born of an older, gentler code passed down through generations, a code of honor now buried beneath the weight of war. He was shy in a way that felt almost antique, a relic of a time when manners mattered, as if kindness itself were a fragile thing requiring both hands to hold without breaking, a delicate treasure in a world of destruction. The guards kept their distance, their heads tilted downward, not in triumph, but in acknowledgement, a silent nod to shared humanity that transcended the battlefield. The air changed, not to safety, not to warmth that could thaw the chill of fear, but to something possible, a space where survival wasn't insult, but tentative hope. The medical check began like a hushed ceremony, almost sacred in its simplicity, a ritual performed with reverence amidst the chaos. Names were called in a steady cadence, temperatures recorded with clinical precision, soap bubbled under calloused fingers worn by labor, and a soothing cream cool bruises without the sting of intent, a balm applied with care. Name? The officer asked, his pencil poised over a worn notebook, its pages yellowed and creased from use, a tool of bureaucracy in a land of survival. AKO, she replied, her voice steady but soft, a whisper carried on the wind of her resolve. He wrote it down with care, as if her name carried a weight worth preserving, a small act of humanity etched into the record. Outside, the war raged on, hammering the world into smaller, jagged fragments, tearing at the edges of hope with every explosion, every scream carried on the wind. Inside the tent, under the flickering glow of a lantern casting dancing shadows on the canvas walls, the khaki uniforms of the guards softened into something human, almost approachable, their stern lines blurred by the light of compassion. The women dried themselves with those thin blankets they had mocked at first sight, their initial laughter now replaced by a fragile flicker of peace, a truce no general had sanctioned, no leader had approved, a silent agreement born of shared suffering. By morning, the camp carried the warm, savory scent of soup, a faint promise of sustenance that drifted through the air like a whispered prayer. Steam curled upward from dented cans over open fires, its tendrils rising into the dawn sky as workers moved with a rhythm born of habit, not hatred, their steps a dance of survival etched into their bones. A soldier, his face creased with a wordless smile, lines etched deep by the trials of war, ladled stew into metal bowls, each portion a small act of care, a spoonful of hope in a sea of despair. Bread arrived, soft, impossibly soft, like a memory from a time before the war had a name, before it had carved its mark into every heart with the precision of a sculptor's chisel. Someone whispered, half in jest, that their own leaders had fed them worse, their voices low but sharp with truth, a bitter edge to their humor. The guard didn't understand the words, a language barrier thick as the camp's walls, but the sentiment lingered, hanging in the air like a curtain slowly being drawn back to reveal a glimpse of light, a crack in the darkness. You've heard this kind of story before, haven't you? The enemy, expected to be cruel, their faces twisted with malice in the mind's eye, surprises with kindness, a twist no one saw coming. Trust in goodness, battered by war, its edges worn and frayed, creeps back into the heart, a timid visitor seeking refuge. It's a tale that sits comfortably in books, its pages worn by countless readers, feels warm in documentaries narrated with soothing voices, and glows softly in a thumbnail bathed in gentle light, a beacon of hope in a digital sea. But even then, in the shadow of the camp's fence, barbed wire glinting under the moon, small acts pierced the gloom, tiny beacons in the night. Cigarette cases clicked open like tiny doors to another world, a fleeting escape from the present. An Australian soldier, his face flushed with embarrassment, a red stain on his pale cheeks, muttered a quiet sorry when his arm brushed a prisoner's, a stumble of human connection. That apology mattered, not because it was needed to maintain order, a tool of control in a rigid system, but because it carried the weight of both danger and dignity, a recognition of the humanity standing before him, fragile but unbroken. At roll call, Sergeant Wallace read names with a voice that didn't try to command the heavens, its tone steady and grounded, free of divine pretension. He kept time like a clock, steady, exact, relentless in its precision, ticking away the minutes of captivity. The women slept under blankets so thin they seemed like a cruel joke, a mockery of comfort in the cold night, yet those fragile scraps of fabric became a promise when the night held still, when the air was quiet and the stars refused to judge, their light a silent witness. AKO, before the lights went out, her hands trembling slightly with the weight of her thoughts, scribbled a single line on a scrap of ration paper, its edges frayed and stained. The enemy isn't what we were told. By morning, it was gone, vanished like a ghost in the night. The barracks had been searched, as they always were, a ritual of control repeated with mechanical regularity. Letters, dried flowers pressed between pages like relics of a lost world, pencil sketches of half-remembered homes, the smallest tokens of freedom vanished into the gray pocket of protocol, swallowed by the system's insatiable appetite. When Wallace caught her searching for the paper, his voice was low, almost a whisper, a breath against the silence. "You shouldn't risk this." He took the note, hesitated, his fingers pausing over the fragile paper, and didn't throw it away, not where anyone could see. This is where the first version of the story often ends, where the music swells with triumphant chords and the narrator offers a tidy lesson, a bow wrapped around the chaos, towels, soup, cigarettes, good men, proof that even in war, humanity endures a flicker of light in the darkness. But that's only half the truth, and half-truths are a luxury for peacetime, a privilege reserved for those who can afford to look away. If you want the real story, the one that grips your soul with iron fingers, the one history murmurs in the quiet moments when no one's listening, a whisper in the shadows, you have to follow what came next. Because the next orders weren't about kindness, they were about control, a leash tightened around compassion. Kindness in uniform is permitted only on a short leash, tethered to the demands of authority, a prisoner of its own design. In the ledgers where wars are measured, their pages filled with blood and ink, mercy must be logged as procedure, a bureaucratic stamp, or it risks looking like weakness, a flaw in the machine of conflict, a crack in the armor. So let's be honest. Let's hold both truths in our hands without letting either slip through our fingers like sand. The towel that warmed a trembling prisoner's fingers, its softness a brief respite, coexists with the form that reduced her to a number before she could be a person again, a dehumanizing tally in a ledger. Let's ask the question you came for, and the one you didn't know you needed to ask. A shadow lurking in the corners of your mind? Was this kindness, or was it just compliance with rules designed to keep disease at bay and reputations intact? A mask for self-preservation? You can decide later when the dust has settled, but first, witness the transfer, a pivotal shift in the narrative. Rumors in a camp spread faster than letters ever could, their wings carrying whispers through the barbed wire. By midweek, the easy chatter in the mess hall had thinned to a cautious murmur, voices lowered against the threat of eavesdroppers. The cook swore he saw Wallace pass something through the fence, a small, secretive act, a breach in the wall of protocol. The supply man insisted it was just bread, nothing more, a mundane explanation for a suspicious deed. Another claimed it was a folded thing, the kind of object that becomes an accusation before it sharpens into truth, a blade poised to strike. "Stay back," Lieutenant Harris warned Wallace under the cover of midnight. "The stars hidden by a thick blanket of clouds. We're not here to make friends." Kindness is a pretty word men toss around until it costs them their rank, a stern reminder of the hierarchy's iron grip. At sunrise, a list appeared on the bulletin board, stark and unyielding, its edges curling slightly in the morning damp. 51 names destined for the American-run camp at Batangas, each one a sentence carved in type. Normal relocation, the typed line assured, a hollow promise meant to soothe, but no one trusts the word normal when trucks are idling nearby, their engines a low growl of impending change. Ato's name was on the page, a puncture wound in the morning's fragile calm, a shock to the system. Wallace read the manifest twice, his fingers pressing the paper to his chest as if it could shield him from the orders etched upon it, a barrier against the inevitable. The trucks rolled out under sodium lamps that cast a sterile glow, making everything look both clean and guilty, a paradox of light and shadow. Akko climbed into the wooden bed of a truck, its rough surface biting into her palms, and for the first time raised her hand in a salute. Not surrender, a white flag of defeat, not romance, a fleeting dream of love, but a soldier's quiet acknowledgement that discipline can carry respect, a bridge between duty and humanity. Wallace returned the gesture with the smallest nod a human could offer, a silent declaration. I see you, a recognition etched in the dawn. The American camp reeked of bleach, a sharp, clinical scent that clung to the air like a second skin, inescapable and antiseptic. Whitewashed barracks stood in rigid rows like soldiers at attention, their uniformity a testament to order. Flags moved with mechanical precision as if obeying unspoken orders from an unseen commander, their fabric snapping in the breeze. The guards didn't look at the prisoners, not out of respect, a gesture of courtesy, but because looking is intimate, a connection the system preferred to avoid, and the system preferred things that could be counted, measured, controlled with cold efficiency. The British had run their camp on habit, a patchwork of routines stitched together with time, a quilt of survival. The Americans ran theirs on design, a machine of efficiency, its gears turning with relentless precision. Numbers came before names, a hierarchy of digits over identity. Showers were timed to the minute, not swayed by emotion, a clock dictating their lives. Coffee tasted like protocol, its bitterness a reminder of rules, but it arrived precisely on schedule, a small mercy in a rigid world. The Red Cross emblem hung prominently, not as a promise of hope to lift their spirits, but as a policy that could be audited, checked, verified with a clipboard and a pen. You can call it cold, a frost that chills the soul. You can call it efficient, a machine that never falters. Both are true, a duality etched in the camp's very structure. The order came again, take off your clothes. This time, it was recited like a script, mechanical, devoid of explanation or apology, a recitation from a manual. Inside the concrete room, pipes hissed like serpents bound to clocks, their metallic voices a chorus of control. Mist sprayed, not gas, a weapon of death, but a disinfectant that did the grim work of killing what kills in camps, a silent assassin of disease. Eyes closed, a shield against the unknown. 2 minutes, a brief eternity. Step out, a command obeyed. Towel next, a reward for compliance. A nurse's voice rose over the wet echo, sharp and commanding, cutting through the steam. Keep moving. No one stared, their eyes averted. No one leered, no predatory gaze. No one offered comfort either, no hand to hold. The system's mercy was industrialized, churned out like a product on an assembly line, mass-produced and impersonal. Reports later glowed with statistics, fewer outbreaks, a victory over sickness, higher recovery rates, a triumph of medicine, body weight up 40% in 6 months, a measure of survival. You can scoff at numbers, their cold precision, until one of them is your pulse, beating against the odds with a stubborn rhythm. You can thank the science that kept you alive, a lifeline in the dark, and still feel your humanity pooling in the drain, washed away with the grime, a loss mourned in silence. Both are true, a paradox that defines the experience. At night, AKO lay awake, her body pressed against the hard surface of a cot, staring at the corrugated metal walls, their ridges a map of her confinement, her mind drifting back to the British tent like a moth to a flame. She saw the shame in her own trembling hands, the memory vivid and raw, the guards' averted faces, a shield of respect, the cigarette offered like a human apology, a small peace offering. Here in the American camp, the guards didn't look away when the women undressed. They didn't look at all, their eyes fixed on a distant point. There's a difference, subtle but profound, a nuance that shifts the meaning. One says, I respect your space, a boundary honored. The other says you exist only as a risk to be managed, a box to be checked, a reduction to data. Letters disappeared here too, faster than before, swallowed by the system's hunger. Inspections were thorough, like new brooms sweeping away every trace of individuality, leaving nothing but dust. A notice on the barracks door carved time into rigid blocks, a schedule that left no room for spontaneity, a prison of minutes. The women adapted because the body is a negotiator, bending to survive, a willow in the storm. The mind learns from it, mapping out new ways to endure, a cartographer of resilience. AKO memorized the paths between barracks, their twists and turns a lifeline, the best spot in line for the hottest coffee, a small victory, the hour when the sea's distant roar sounded like freedom, even if it was just air moving across an unreachable horizon, a dream deferred. And yet, even in this architecture of distance, a fortress of isolation, small acts of care persisted, like weeds breaking through concrete, their roots unyielding. Kindness endured, a stubborn flame. Akko steadied older women as they navigated uneven steps, her nurse's instincts guiding her hands with a gentle touch, a lifeline in the chaos. She shared her bread halves with a quiet resolve no uniform could extinguish, a silent rebellion against scarcity. In the dark, she whispered prayers she'd forgotten, not for salvation to lift her soul, but to remember who she was, a tether to her past. They clean our bodies, she murmured to the shadows, her voice a soft echo, and somehow they clean our hate, too, a cleansing beyond the physical. She didn't say erase, she said clean, a distinction with depth. Washing doesn't end a story, a final chapter closed. It prepares you to begin again, to step into the next chapter with clearer eyes, a renewed perspective. You came for a story about American kindness, and you're getting it. Real, measured, sometimes warm like a fleeting touch that brushes the skin, sometimes cold enough to sting like antiseptic, a sharp bite of reality. But here's the twist you didn't expect. The one you might not want to face, a revelation that challenges the narrative. Kindness can be a policy without becoming love, a rule without a heart. Mercy can be mandated and still matter, its impact real despite its source. A thin blanket can save a life on the same day a pencil reduces that life to a line of numbers on a form. A stark contrast etched in ink. Both are true and neither cancels the other. A balance that defies easy judgment. So, were the Americans heroes, cloaked in glory? Were they kind, their actions pure? Did they live up to the rumors and the promises glowing in soft-lit thumbnails, a beacon of hope? Yes. And also yes, but with rules so strict that kindness was filed under compliance, a box checked to keep the system running smoothly, a cog in the machine? If that makes you uncomfortable, a knot in your stomach, it should, a call to question. War is where contradictions curl up to sleep, nestled in the quiet, and wake as orders, sharp and unyielding, a blade in the dawn. On August 15th, a loudspeaker crackled to life, its static slicing through the morning like a knife, a sound that cut through the haze. The sergeant adjusted a dial, his fingers steady on the controls, and a voice brighter than the sun, a beacon piercing the gloom, announced that Japan had given up completely, accepting unconditional surrender, a capitulation etched in history. The camp froze, like a clock choosing to become a bell, its chime heavy with meaning, a toll that resonated in every heart. There was no cheering, no outburst of joy to lift the spirits, no celebration to break the silence. Helmets came off, heads bowed, a gesture of respect or exhaustion, because victory can feel like a funeral with better weather, a moment of relief shadowed by loss, a bittersweet dawn. AKO didn't cry, her eyes dry despite the weight. She felt something more dangerous, a feeling that threatened both sides equally, freedom, fragile and untested, a glass held in trembling hands. If this were propaganda, the story would end here, wrapped in a neat bow, its edges smooth and polished. A good nation did good things, a moral tale for the ages, and everyone learned a tidy lesson, a conclusion etched in stone. But the gate didn't swing open with the words, "Peace comes as waiting, not as horns," a poetic promise unfulfilled. The women boarded a ship through air thick with rust and patience, the taste of metal and time lingering on their tongues, a bitter reminder of the journey. Akko leaned on the ship's rail, her thoughts drifting to a letter she'd written, its words a lifeline, and a man who hadn't learned to be cruel fast enough to match the rumors, a flicker of humanity in the storm. Both would outlast the camp, their existence a quiet defiance of the war's attempt to erase them, a testament to resilience. If you're searching for an easy verdict, a simple yes or no, the ocean will disappoint you, its depths refusing to yield. It doesn't offer answers, a guide to truth. It only holds opposites together until they blur into the horizon, a gray expanse of ambiguity. Tokyo emerged as a silhouette of broken teeth, a city scarred but standing, its wounds visible in the dawn. Repatriation officials wore armbands that felt like apologies, their gestures formal but hollow, a ritual without depth. 6 million people would come home in a procession that felt less like a return, a joyous homecoming, and more like a translation, a shift from one language of survival to another, a redefinition of identity. The city smelled of smoke and seaweed, a blend of destruction and life, a paradox in every breath. A child, wide-eyed and curious, a spark of innocence in the ruin, offered Ako a rice ball through a fence, a simple gift. She accepted it with both hands because gratitude remains a language, even when flags change and borders shift, a universal dialect. In a dormitory built to be temporary but feeling permanent, its walls a prison of time, she found a yellowed scrap of paper the Americans hadn't taken. The first line of a letter the British had almost taught her to finish, to the man who showed me kindness when war forgot how. She folded it into the lining of her coat, a hidden pocket where memory and lint coexist, a sanctuary for the past, and let time do what it does to paper and people alike, wearing them down but never fully erasing them, a slow erosion of edges. Decades aren't a plot twist, a sudden turn in the narrative. They're proof that a story meant something beyond one camp, one order, one morning, a ripple that spread through time. Empires changed their names, their flags, their stories, a reshuffling of power. A generation learned to rebuild, laying bricks over wounds still raw before it learned to forgive, a lesson hard won. Each August, when the air hummed with the relentless song of cicadas, their chorus, a symphony of survival, AKO's fingers sought that hidden pocket, checking if the past still had a pulse, if it still carried the weight of truth, a heartbeat in the fabric. The museum that eventually displayed her letter wasn't grand, a palace of history, just a modest space with soft light to preserve, good air to protect, and a budget that prioritized reverence over spectacle, a humble tribute. The archivist nearly missed the folded paper stitched into the coat's lining, a treasure hidden in plain sight. He opened it with the care of someone unlocking a door that might stir a ghost, a delicate balance of curiosity and respect. The handwriting was disciplined and graceful, the kind a nurse perfects to ensure doctors don't make fatal mistakes, a precision born of necessity. The first line didn't shout, it bowed, humble and precise, a gesture of gratitude. On another continent, in a dusty attic far from Manila, its corners cobwebbed with neglect, a different box waited, labeled in a different hand, its ink faded, Ram C, personal, a cryptic marker. Inside was a pencil translation scrawled on the back of a Japanese letter, its lines shaky but deliberate, the same words, the same careful kindness of someone who refused to let the meaning slip, a guardian of intent. Sergeant David Wallace had survived long enough to leave the army. His uniform, traded for civilian clothes, long enough for his son, Hichi, to puzzle over why a man would keep a foreign letter in a place where anyone could find it, a mystery in the open, yet no one could understand it, its language a barrier. The historian who paired the two documents didn't declare a victor or assign blame, a judge stepping back from the bench. He offered a sentence that refuses to fade, its truth enduring. It wasn't strategy that ended their hatred, a calculated plan of victory. It was small acts of goodness, not the propaganda of one nation, a loud chorus of lies, not the tidy conclusions that make endings easy, a polished finish, just towels, cigarette soup, averted eyes, a timed shower, a thin blanket that kept a woman alive long enough to question her certainty, a spark of doubt in the dark. You wanted a story with two sides, a clear accounting of right and wrong, a ledger balanced with justice. Here's the balance sheet no one can settle, its columns irreconcilable, a British camp where kindness blushed, shy and unscripted, a flush of humanity. An American camp where kindness clocked in and out, precise as a machine, a shift worker of compassion. A rumor that turned a decent guard into a liability, a threat to order, a pebble in the gears. A system that kept women alive with procedures that sometimes felt like erasure, stripping away their names to make them numbers, a dehumanizing tally. A letter that survived both its words, a quiet rebellion against oblivion, a voice that refused to be silenced. So, was it true or false? We were told to take off our clothes, and what happened next left women speechless, a silence born of shock. True, because shame didn't arrive where it was expected, a missed appointment with despair, because a towel can spark a revolution when you thought death had claimed the morning shift, a reclaiming of agency. And also false if you were hoping for a fairy tale where a flag behaves like a person, where nations act with the warmth of a human heart, a narrative too neat to hold. Flags don't act, they're fabric mute. People do, their hands shaping the world. The ending you're reaching for isn't a verdict, a final judgment, but an invitation to hold two truths in one hand without letting either fall, a delicate balance. To admit that America did things that deserve the word kind, soup that warmed the belly, showers that cleansed the skin, systems that saved lives, a lifeline in the storm, and that it often did them for reasons tied to reputation, a polished image, disease control, a pragmatic shield, rules, a rigid framework, and paperwork, a bureaucratic burden. Those reasons don't diminish the warmth of the soup that kept a woman's pulse steady, a heartbeat preserved. To admit that kindness in uniform walks a tight leash, held by men who fear its power, a trembling grip, and yet sometimes it breaks free, fleeting but real, long enough to matter, a brief liberation. AKO's granddaughter, Hannah, stood before the glass case on the museum's opening day, the air thick with anticipation, and read a line written decades before her birth, a legacy in ink. If this letter lives, let tell the truth. The enemy I feared most was my own heart. A confession laid bare. She whispered the name like a password to a house they'd both lived in without ever meeting, a shared space of memory and grace, a connection across time. Rain tapped the museum windows with the patience of oceans, steady and unhurried, a rhythm of nature. Somewhere, a curator straightened a placard, because respect is a task performed in small, deliberate movements, a quiet act of honor. You came for a myth about one side's goodness, a single hero in the tale, and stayed for a truth that embraces both, a duality embraced. That's not betrayal, a stab in the back. It's growing up, stepping into the complexity of the world, a maturation of perspective. The letter didn't end in 1945, its story unfinished. It took 70 years to be read, to find its voice in a world ready to listen, a delayed revelation. The museum's climate-controlled air hummed softly, a mechanical lullaby, as visitors leaned over the glass display, their breaths fogging the surface, a mark of their presence. The ink had bled at the edges like memory does when it outlives the hands that wrote it, a slow fade of history. To the man who showed me kindness when war forgot how, a tribute etched in precision. Ako's handwriting remained precise, as if she feared even gratitude could be misread by history's unforgiving gaze, a caution in every stroke. Beside it sat the English translation, Wallace's pencil notes faint but unwavering, a mirror of her words, a reflection of intent. Together, they told a story the world hadn't wanted to hear, a narrative rejected. Mercy doesn't fit neatly into flags, no matter how proudly they wave, their colors mute to human need. Behind the museum glass, the war was silent, preserved in stillness, a frozen tableau. But beyond it, in the clamor of online forums buzzing with debate, in the pages of textbooks yellowing with age, in late-night arguments over coffee steaming in mugs, the war still fought for its narrative, a battle of perspectives. One side declared, "See, even in victory, we were kind, our humanity shining through, a boast of triumph." The other countered, "You can't wash blood with soap and call it care. Kindness doesn't erase the chains," a cry of justice. Both were partly right, and that partial truth is the most dangerous kind, slippery and sharp, refusing to be pinned down, a blade that cuts both ways. Hannah stood quietly near the display, her hand resting on the glass as if warmth could travel backward through time, bridging the gap between her and her grandmother, a connection forged in absence. She was the first in her family to speak English fluently, a new tongue mastered, the first to walk Manila's streets, a pilgrimage of memory, the first to understand that AKO's story didn't end with survival, a mere breath. It ended with understanding, a harder and rarer victory, a triumph of the spirit. In her pocket, she carried a notebook filled with translations, fragments of both letters copied side by side, their words trembling like leaves in a faint breeze, a quiver of emotion. Beneath them, she wrote her own note: "War doesn't decide who was good, a judgment withheld. It only reveals who refused to forget their humanity, a truth uncovered." Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the air heavy with the scent of wet earth, a perfume of renewal. The museum lights dimmed for closing, a signal of night's approach, and for a moment the reflection in the glass wove Hannah's face together with AKO's handwriting, 2 generations separated by 70 years, bound by an act of impossible kindness, a thread of connection. Later that night, as the staff locked the exhibit, the keys jingling softly, one curator paused at the case and whispered, "She forgave the world before it asked," a revelation in the dark. That's the piece of history no nation dares to teach, the truth that lingers in the margins, too quiet for manifestos shouted from rooftops but too stubborn to fade, a whisper that endures. If this story challenges what you were taught, even just a little, a crack in the foundation, don't turn away. A refusal to ignore. Subscribe and ring the bell, a call to action. Next week, we'll follow a convoy where kindness arrived late, a delayed gift, where the question of humanity's place in war will be asked again, a persistent inquiry, because history only earns its meaning when we keep testing it, peeling back its layers to find the truths it guards, a relentless pursuit of understanding.